Good morning to the Honorable Ministers of the Council, members of the media, online viewers, radio listeners via St. Martin Gov Radio 107.9 FM, and respective radio stations island-wide. I'm Roach, and welcome to the live Council of Ministers press briefing for today, Wednesday, June 19th, 2019. At this time, I invite the Prime Minister and Minister of General Affairs, the Honorable Leona Romeo Marlin, to address you. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Rolika. Good morning to all my colleagues, members of the press. Good morning, St. Martin. On Monday, June 17th, while on a working visit to Curaçao, I attended the Dutch Caribbean countries tripartite meeting on prime ministers. Prime Minister of Curaçao, the Honorable Eugene Rugenaert, and Prime Minister of Aruba, the Honorable Evelyn Wever were all present. During the meeting, a number of topics were discussed, including the ongoing situation in Venezuela, the Social Economic Council Symposium on Migration, OCTA, integrity and anti-corruption matters, and digitalization of government services. As Prime Minister of St. Martin, I also attended the General Shareholder Meeting of the Sabre Bank to discuss the way forward with the other shareholders in the company, namely Curaçao, the Best Islands, and the Netherlands. The St. Martin delegation also met with the University of Curaçao Law Program and held discussions on building further cooperation, specifically in the field of law. The two parties spoke about the possibility of having persons on St. Martin follow legal courses via a virtual academy, the legal translation of the law in English, and possible assistance to address the lack of legislative lawyers pending the completion of legislation, and of course, research in legislative matters on St. Martin. Last week, the National Recovery Program Bureau participated in information sessions about the trust fund for the business community on Aruba, Curaçao, and St. Martin. During these sessions, the NRPB provided general information on the recovery process of St. Martin, the procurement procedures of the World Bank, and the formation of joint ventures and consortia with local companies. The events were organized in close collaboration with the representatives of the Dutch Ministry of Interior and Kingdom Relation in Willemstad, Oranjestad, and Philipsburg, along with the Dutch Caribbean Chambers of Commerce, Curaçao, Aruba, and St. Martin, the World Bank, and the Netherlands Enterprise Agency. Over 200 persons representing different companies in the various sectors, including consultants, engineers, architects, contractors, lawyers, and more, attended. At each session, presentations on specific areas were given by the involved agencies and valuable information was shared. Participants were guided through examples of tendering documents and given the opportunity to ask questions. Several queries were posed about the timing of upcoming tenders and the registration of companies on St. Martin. In particular, on Aruba and Curaçao, interest was shown in the opportunity to establish joint ventures with local St. Martin companies. The sessions were a follow-up to the joint introductory webinar on World Bank procurement procedures organized last month between the three islands. Considering the success of the webinar and last week's meetings, the three chambers of commerce have agreed to further facilitate and coordinate opportunities for company matchmaking and partnerships between the islands. The NRPB will continue to ensure that these types of sessions are provided to stakeholders, as educated and knowledgeable participants will safeguard transparency in the recovery process moving forward. And finally, the final Hurricane Expo Community Evening Meeting is scheduled for St. Peter's and the surrounding areas tomorrow, June 20th at 7:30 p.m. at the St. Peter's Community Center. The Hurricane Expo Community Evenings are designed to raise the awareness to the public or of the public in order to make the necessary preparations before the peak of the hurricane season 2019. The Government of St. Martin hereby invites you to visit and participate in the upcoming Ready, Set, Prepare Hurricane Expo 2019, which is scheduled to take place on June 22nd from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. on the Clem-LaBega Square parking lot in front of the former Government Administration Building in Philipsburg. The entrance to the expo is free. The idea between the Ready, Set, Prepare Hurricane Expo 2019 is to create a one-stop shop for the community to obtain useful information on hurricane preparedness by service providers, government entities, and NGOs. I thank you, and these have been my announcements for today, and I look forward for your questions.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for your opening remarks. At this time, I invite the Minister of Education, Culture, Youth and Sport, the Honorable Wycliffe Smith, to address you. Minister Smith.
Thank you very much, Ms. Roach. Greetings to all gathered here this morning. Honorable Prime Minister and colleague ministers, the Department of Communications, members of the press, as well as the listening and viewing audiences via radio, television, and social media. Good morning, Sualiga. Last Thursday, June 13th, we observed Flag Day. I wish to extend my gratitude to all who participated in the official ceremonies at the Bell's flagpole on the Kobe Hill. A special thanks goes out to Ms. Clara Reyes, head of the Department of Culture, and her team for the organization of the events. Schools also observed the day by holding an extraordinary assembly for the hoisting of the flag. And it is important that we celebrate our country and teach our children civic pride. May the St. Martin flag continue to remind us of our courage, our resilience, and our friendliness as a people who are always progressing. This week, UNESCO held a 2-day workshop for the Memory of the World program in this region on St. Martin. Through the Memory of the World program, UNESCO aims to preserve the documentary heritage of our region, all of which are of historical and cultural significance to our countries. The objective of this workshop in St. Martin was to restore and to strengthen the capacity in St. Martin. In other words, the intent of the training was to prepare the participants to be able to formulate successful proposals and for documentaries so that they could be inscribed in the national, regional, and international registries of the Memory of the World program. 2 UNESCO representatives came especially for this workshop. Ms. Isabel Vieira, Advisor for Communication and Information from the UNESCO Cluster Office for Caribbean, situated in Jamaica. And the other representative was Ms. Yolia Totolero, Vice President of the Memory of the World Regional Committee in Latin America and the Caribbean. Ms. Totolero is actually stationed in Mexico. I would really like to thank the Secretary General of UNESCO for St. Martin, Ms. Marcelia Henry, for her dedication to the tasks and for working along with the UNESCO Cluster Office for the Caribbean in Jamaica to facilitate the event. Marcelia, we really appreciate your work. Thanks also to those stakeholders who attended the event: the museum, the Phillipsburg Jubilee Library, the Department of Communications, the Department of Records and Information Management, known to us as DIV, the Department of Culture, Civil Registry, and others who participated. And a special thanks also to the Cadastre for allowing the participants to visit their archives. Yesterday, June 18th, I was privileged to attend a meeting with school boards organized by the Department of Education. I mainly addressed the school boards on 2 topics: the repairs and rebuilding of schools, and the second topic dealt with a proposal to retrain teachers to make them fully qualified to work in our school system. This project will certainly mitigate the teacher shortage in the future. The idea is to consult with school boards and to get the necessary data regarding teachers and regarding the financial ramifications in order to be able to submit a sound proposal to the Council of Ministers for approval. We're looking at starting this project in the beginning of the new school year. And something on the annual swimming program. The 2018-2019 school swim program has come to an end. Every year, the program sees the participation of students from various primary schools at the grade 3 level participate in the swimming program. Over this past school year, the program saw the participation of over 500 students from 27 primary schools, and over 70 students received their A diploma through the program. This swimming program is geared towards those students who are unable to receive swimming instruction privately, which gives them equal opportunity to learn how to swim. The aim is to introduce those students to the water and teach them to swim with the intention of them receiving an A diploma. It is important to note that there are many students who enter the program having already received a diploma and those who are taking lessons privately. The annual water polo tournament was held earlier this month. This tournament is anticipated by students and schools every year, and it brings a lot of excitement and glory to the winning school. This year, the Hillside Christian School took the trophy as first place, while the Sister Magda School and the Learning Unlimited School took second and third places respectively. Congratulations to those schools and to all the participants. We would also like to congratulate those students who received their diplomas this year through the program, and we look forward to working with the schools for the next school year. On Monday, July 1st, 2019, the Department of Culture will commemorate Emancipation Day celebrations with a reenactment of the Diamond Estate 26th Run for Freedom. This year's event is entitled 64,000. We Have a Name, in tribute to the 64,000 enslaved men, women, and children who were liberated from slavery within the Dutch Kingdom on July 1st, 1863. The Diamond Estate was a plantation on the border between Colbay and Bellevue, Marigot, that on May 29th, 2 days after the abolishment of slavery was announced on the French side, 26 slaves ran to their freedom. This event is described in detail from documents in the archives. The event will be marked by a reenactment supported with numerous other dramatizations drawn from the pages of the archives. Run for Freedom will take place at 12:01 a.m. on July 1st, 2019, on the grounds of the former Diamond Estate located on the Union Road across the roundabout at the end of the Simpson Bay Causeway. Rehearsals are on the way with numerous participants that will present a cultural manifestation in song, dance, and the spoken word. There is a sense of urgency to present this reenactment, as future reenactments may not be possible due to the development of the land for commercial purposes. We invite the general public to come to the John Larmony Center on Thursday, June the 20th at 6 p.m. to begin the rehearsals and the preparation to be part of the reenactment. And this reenactment is entitled 64,000 We Have a Name, in tribute to the 64,000 enslaved men, women, and children that were liberated from slavery within the Dutch Kingdom on July 1st, 1983. Thank you for watching and for listening, and I'll be available for any questions that you may have. Have a pleasant day.
Thank you, Minister Smith, for your opening remarks. At this time, I invite the Minister of Public Health, Social Development, and Labor, the Honorable Emil Lee, to address you. Minister Lee.
Good morning, members of the media, colleagues, and those listening by radio, television, or internet. Good morning. I have two brief topics to touch on. Last week, there was the FCCA, or the Cruise Line Association meeting here in St. Martin. And the Council of Ministers was invited for a meeting with representatives from the FCCA and from the cruise line, so its members as well. It was a nice opportunity, actually, for me to catch up with some old friends. A lot of the people, I know them from my previous career in hospitality. But it was also a great opportunity for me to speak to them about my topics that relate to the Ministry of Health, Labor, and Social Development. So there was two topics that we touched on. So number one is from a medical perspective. The cruise lines have staff, they have employees on their ships, and very often they need medical services. And so as we look at expanding the range of services, the depth and breadth of what we offer here in St. Martin, it also provides them an opportunity for their staff to get tests and treatments and diagnosis for their crew members. And so that's something that they're interested in talking about as we evolve our healthcare sector here. The second topic we talked about was the possibility for employment on the cruise lines. There's been some previous discussions about opportunities for residents from St. Martin to work in the cruise line industry, and discussed what some of the barriers are, but also what are the opportunities. You know, there's an opportunity, obviously, to see the world. The cruise lines obviously travel. They go from different sectors of the world, so it's a great way to see the world. It's also a great way to gain valuable work experience. The fact is that the customer satisfaction in general in the cruise industry is very high. The level of training, their standards, I think, are well established, and so it's an opportunity for people from St. Martin to gain that work experience. And the other opportunity is, because you live on board the cruise ships, you're provided housing, you're provided food, you're provided all of your necessities. Actually, the money that you earn, you have the opportunity to save that money for the future. So I think there's an interesting opportunity for some of our people to participate there. But in our discussions, one of the requirements is that there needs to be an adjustment to what they refer to as our seafarers legislation, which basically regulates the hiring and job placement of our local people in foreign flagged vessels. And so we're looking jointly. They've sent us some legislation in terms of how this has been done in other countries. And so we're looking at our legislative process to see what would be involved in terms of making those changes. The second topic I'd like to touch on, and as a matter of fact, one of our members of the media asked, why is the Minister of Health going on a tour of hospitality hotels? So I went last week, again with Council of Ministers, those who could attend, to a tour organized by the general contractors of the Diamond and Flamingo resorts. And so we went, those who could attend from the Council of Ministers, but of course I go with my perspective of the Ministry of VSA. So the tour was organized by the general contractor, or BWIGS, and for those of you recall that they've received a number of permits through our incidental work permit program, right? Because they have a lot of work and they didn't have sufficient amount of labor. And again, this goes back to what we've done as a ministry to try and facilitate the reconstruction process. So this was an opportunity for me to see actually what were the living conditions. Remember, as the incidental permit, one of the requirements is that they need to provide housing for the workers so that they don't displace locals from housing or drive up the rental prices. So it was interesting to see how they've arranged their housing accommodations to make sure that they're clean and hygienic, of course, and their work conditions, etc. So it was an opportunity for me to see in practice how it's been working, and it seems to be working well for them. It was also an opportunity to meet some of the NEPA graduates. As you know, we've had some graduates who've come out of the construction skills training program, and a number of them were picked up and hired by BWIGS, the company doing the work for the Diamond and Flamingo resorts. It was interesting. I do have a bit of a interest in construction as well, so it was interesting to see their construction techniques, that indeed they are very concerned about building back better. They want to make sure that the structure is stronger. And so it was interesting to see their choices in the framing for the windows, the wall construction, the choices for windows and doors. They certainly are paying a lot of attention to the details in terms of making sure that there's less opportunities for water damage and, of course, windstorm damages as well. And also they're looking at, so the general manager was there as well. It was interesting to see they're also taking into account, operational efficiencies in the future. How do we make sure that our energy costs are reduced? And so they're taking the opportunity to do those things in their reconstruction process as well. I, of course, clarified, and as I've said here in this press briefings a number of times, the reconstruction of the physical buildings, of course, is an important part of the reconstruction process. The sooner that the hotels or timeshare properties come back on operation, the sooner that our people can return back to their regular full-time employment in the hospitality sector. But I also stress that local participation is critical. In other words, if our local economy doesn't participate in that reconstruction process, it isn't, in my opinion, a true reconstruction process. And so it was an opportunity to stress to the general contractor that either directly or indirectly, that the more local involvement is better for the community. And this is our perspective. As long as they are good corporate citizens and they're trying their best to involve local participation, they will find government and certainly the Ministry of VSA to be a very willing and cooperative and facilitating partner. And in response, actually, they mentioned that a few weeks ago they went through a compliance check through all of their staff as well as with their subcontractors to ensure that their staff were compliant. And those that were not were asked not to participate in the project. So I'm very happy to hear that the wishes of the ministry, the goals of the government to ensure that the businesses that are performing are compliant, making sure that people are properly documented, paying their taxes and paying their social premiums. Again, that's all a critical part of our reconstruction process. Thank you very much. I'm here to answer any questions for you.
Thank you, Minister Lee, for your opening remarks. At this time, I invite the Minister of Justice, the Honorable Cornelius de Wever, to address you. Minister de Wever.
Thank you, Ms. Roach. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning to the press. Good morning, St. Martin. Last week, I had the opportunity to mention about some of the laws that we have been able to pass recently in the Council of Ministers. And yesterday was no different. We passed the final one, which is the ordinance to amend Book 2 of the Civil Code. I want to mention that the three laws that have been passed are the ordinance to amend the Penal Code, the ordinance to amend the Penal Procedure Code, and yesterday was the ordinance to amend Book 2 of the Civil Code. These ordinances now have to be debated and hopefully adopted in Parliament, but also implemented by September. The ministry and I are in touch with all the stakeholders, and hopefully we will be in time, because we also have to translate them into English, and they also have to be vetted by the CFATF. This will allow us to meet the CFATF plenary deadline, and in so doing, avoid any international negative public statement. The work is not done yet, and we will still have to put forward our best efforts and make sure that the parliamentarians also clear these legislative hurdles. The PowerPoint presentation that I will be given on Monday for the public debate of the budget will be available on our Facebook page. I encourage you to go there and see for yourself what is being done in the Ministry of Justice. I thank you, and I will await your questions.
Thank you, Minister de Wever, for your opening remarks. If you've just joined us, you are watching the live Council of Ministers press briefing. Thank you for joining us. We now move over to the question and answer session. Alita Singh of the Daily Herald, you have the floor.
Good morning. Thank you, Relaika. Good morning, Prime Minister, other ministers of the Council. My question is for the Prime Minister. As Dutch State Secretary Mr. Raymond Knops is expected to visit next week, could you give us a highlight of what are some of the issues on the agenda that has already been set to discuss with him?
Thank you for that question, Alita. In all honesty, I haven't received that agenda as yet. I should be receiving it this week, but I haven't received it from... More than likely, we will be discussing the status of the NRPB. So, for example, the projects that are ongoing right now, and that's basically what the discussion will be about and what I expect. I expect them to perhaps look at certain locations of and look at where the money is being invested. I know a lot of. I know the St. Martin Development Fund, Mr. Franca and his team have been working diligently to ensure that they execute some projects. I know that part is being finalized. I think they've been granted a total of 75 homes, but in stages, so they will start out with 25. So I'm pretty much sure he's going to come to look at the various projects that are ongoing under the trust fund.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Stephen Cerulean of PJD2 Radio, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Roach. Prime Minister, Mrs. Good morning. My question is for the Prime Minister and, of course, the Minister of ECYS. It has been widely reported that 2 of your ministers have been asked to tender their resignation. I'm sure you have taken note of that. What's your reaction? And take into consideration the fact that it's coming from the coalition partners, a reaction from the Deputy Prime Minister as well.
Thank you for that question. Indeed, I have taken note of the request of the coalition, at least what has been written in the newspapers, that I have read it as well. I will only state that the Council of Ministers will have to discuss the request and speak to the various ministers, and that's my only comment on that specific matter.
Thank you, Mr. Cerulean. With regards to that topic, the coalition will be making a statement, so I'll wait until that statement be made. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you, Minister Smith. Lyndon Brown of BCN TV, you have the floor.
Good morning to the people of St. Martin and to our ministers today. Question to Minister De Wever. Minister De Wever, the Dutch have funded Curacao to help in the influx of Venezuelan national to Curacao. It was last Friday around after 7 where there was some inflict of wound of Venezuelan national who are being in a holding cell here in St. Martin. So far, has St. Martin make any preparation to combat or to help with, we've seen a lot of Venezuelan national here and St. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Brown, for your question. The issue of illegal or undocumented individuals, as I say, out of status, is a general issue on St. Martin. It's not just the Venezuelans, but all in general. The Simpson Bay holding area has been prepared for that use, so that is being done. In addition, we are also, today I'll be signing for the additional staff that we're hiring at the prison, because in order for that location to be open, we also need additional staff there as well. So those are being addressed.
Thank you, Minister De Wever. Andrew Dick of the Daily Herald, you have the floor.
Yes, good morning to the ministers. Minister De Wever, concerning the same resignation topic, how do you feel that you're being asked to resign?
I will not make any comments until I meet with the coalition.
Thank you, Minister De Wever. We now move on to the second round of questions. Alita, you have the floor.
I want to follow up on the concerns of MP Bryson about UTS and not receiving answers to his questions that he has submitted based on his initiative law. Can any one of the ministers, I know Minister De Wever is the representative of UTS, can you give an idea of what is happening to that question and what exactly is the hold-up to Mr. Bryson's request?
Thank you for your question, Ms. Singh. The Minister of Finance is the one actually responsible for the sale of any government assets. He is busy with that, and he will be making a statement regarding that matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister De Wever. Stephen, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Roach. Minister of VSA, Emily. Minister, earlier on you spoke of the fact that you met with the representatives of FCCA, and one of the points discussed was that of employment. We know following the passing of Hurricanes Irma and Maria back in 2017, an appeal was also made to FCCA to have St. Martiners employed on board the various ships. How many persons were employed then?
Stephen, thanks for the question. Unfortunately, it isn't something that I would have access to in terms of the numbers, and even the FCCA, I'm not sure that they would have those numbers because they don't really track employment for their different members. So remember, the FCCA is an association of the various cruise lines, and I don't think the cruise lines have a responsibility to report back to the association on those numbers. It's something I can ask, but I'm sort of skeptical as to whether there is really that number. But remember, what we're talking about is exactly how do we facilitate that process in order to make it easier, because one of the things they did express in our conversation was without that clarity, they've had instances where employees have used different legal jurisdictions when there was an issue, and that created a real confusion for them. And that's why this addressing of the seafarer legislation is an important part of facilitating that employment on the cruise lines.
Thank you, Minister Lee. Lyndon Brown, you have the floor.
Question to the Prime Minister. Minister, normally when the government of St. Martin are in crisis, the people of St. Martin is unhappy. Can you give hope to the people of St. Martin? What is the status of the government of St. Martin now?
Interesting question. What is the status of the government of St. Martin now? I can tell you that I have 7 ministers currently in the Council of Ministers, and I believe that every government have crises at times. The question is, how do we meet those crises? How do we tackle those crises? And I believe that we will do it together. No matter what happens, we will do it together as a team.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Andrew Dick, you have the floor.
Minister Wycliffe-Smith, right now at the PSVE, they have some teachers who are still awaiting their vacation allowance from the school. Have you been apprised of the situation?
Thank you, Mr. Dick, for your question. What the Ministry of Education, Culture, Youth and Sports does is to ensure that subsidy is granted to schools over a 12-month period or for that school year. Included in that subsidy is also, well, of course, the salary, vacation allowance, etc. Schools manage that, and they're the ones then that have to ensure that their teachers are paid their salaries and their vacation allowance. Up to now, I've not had any reports from the PSVE that they have those teachers have not been able to be paid. I haven't had any reports on that.
So as a follow-up, will you find out?
Of course. Thank you for bringing it to my attention.
Thank you, Minister Smith. We now move on to the third round of questions. Alita, you have the floor.
Thanks again, Olaika. My question is for the Minister of Education. Since taking office, you've placed a lot of emphasis on culture and history. However, that doesn't really translate very much into a standardized history and culture curriculum in our schools. Is that something that is being worked on and something that's being thought of at the moment so that students, pupils and students, when they do graduate from elementary school and high school, that they are leaving with a good grounding in St. Martin and in Caribbean history?
That is something that's being looked at the moment. Indeed, we don't have a standardized curriculum for that. I know that school boards and teachers do teach culture, Caribbean history, and so on, but we're looking at a standardized curriculum that would be disseminated amongst all schools.
Thank you, Minister Smith. Stephen Cerulean, you have the floor.
My question is for the Minister of ECYS. Minister, you spoke of Flag Day, which was recently observed. What we have noticed, though, is the fact that there is a lack of respect coming from students in particularly when the flag is hoisting or being lowered. What's been done from your and to ensure that much deserving respect is showed towards the flag of St. Martin.
Thank you very much. I think the attention that we are now starting to give to Flag Day, ensuring that the schools will recognize Flag Day, and also during the course of the school year, that it is something that they would be doing. Much more attention is given to that fact, that the flag be respected. I myself, you know, when I look, not only children, but adults, when the flag is being raised or the St. Martin song is being sung, that adults themselves have no respect at all, and they walk around, they talk, do as if, you know, it's nothing. But I think we need to start somewhere. We start in the schools, but also our adults need to take that into consideration, because they are the examples to our children.
Thank you, Minister Smith. Lyndon Brown, you have the floor.
Question to Minister Lee. Minister Lee, I believe you ought to be proud. You are emphasizing that a lot of graduates have been graduated from NIPA, from the construction. Yeah, a lot of them graduate now being workers in construction. Do you have a number of how much person being graduated and how much person being employed? I can finish right now. Recently, the Prime Minister mentioned that St. Martin is open for business. And you mentioned also recently that construction work is going down. So can you give us some analysis in this area?
Thanks, Mr. Brown. If I recall, the number of the graduates was around 89, 90 persons, of which over 95% of them, I understood, have been placed. And recall that there is a second course that's also in progress, so we expect another group of graduates in the coming months. In terms of the construction sector slowing down, this is the feedback that I've been getting from the community, is that there's a concern that overall the construction work is slowing down, but we don't have a let's say a real scientific approach to it. We had a stakeholder session where contractors were invited. Some of them indeed expressed some concerns about it. So we're still sort of monitoring the situation to see which direction it's going. And of course, a lot of it has to do with financial resources. A lot of people have spent the money that they had in savings, or they've spent their insurance monies, and so the balance still needs to be funded. And so I think it's a combination of a financial issue as well as just things slowing down. And even I've heard as well about requesting and waiting for building permits even. So.
Thank you, Minister Lee. I would like to now welcome the Minister of Tourism, Economic Affairs, Transport and Telecommunication, the Honorable Stuart Johnson, and the Minister of Finance, the Honorable Perry Herlings, to the press briefing this morning. If there are any questions the media would like to direct to the ministers, please indicate so, as we will continue. Andrew Dick, you have the floor.
Yes, good morning to the two ministers that just came in also. Minister Herlings, concerning the taxes owed by the former Minister of Finance, Michael Ferrier, is the Finance Department, or at least the ministry, looking to start any talks to get this money back? Or to get the money, I should say.
Thank you, Mr. Dick. I think the question is not posed correctly. It's not Mr. Ferrier that is owing taxes to the government of St. Martin. It is the company that is established that owes land tax to the government of St. Martin. And yes, there are talks ongoing between the Ministry of Frommie to settle that issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Herling. Stephen Cerulean.
My question is for the Minister of Finance. As it pertains to the budget, when exactly will the discussion start on the floor of Parliament?
Thank you, Mr. Cerulean. As far as I know, the handling is supposed to resume this coming Monday at 10 o'clock.
Thank you, Minister Heerlings. Lyndon Brown, you have the floor.
Question to the Minister of Tourism. We are still pending, Minister. You are yet to speak to the people of St. Martin about the funds that that given to the Carnival community. Do you have that account today?
Thank you, Mr. Brown, for your question. And as the public knows, I speak every single day to them through different forms of media, social media, this press briefing, face-to-face. Every day I speak in a very candid, transparent, and open manner. It concerns the SCDF. The last update is that we are busy finalizing with SOAB the engagement in how that procedure will go. That process actually continues and continues even up to this afternoon, where I have a meeting with SOAB. Once that engagement letter is finalized, then the following week, next week, a meeting will be scheduled with the SCDF, and from there, the continued progress of what the audit and the findings thereafter would be continued to be disseminated to the public. So at this point in time, it is indeed being finalized, is indeed being worked on, and the due diligence in that process continues.
Thank you, Minister Johnson. If there are no further questions from the media? No? Okay. Honorable Ministers of the Council, members of the media, radio listeners, and online viewers, this brings us to the end of the live Council of Ministers press briefing for today, Wednesday, June 19th, 2019. For rebroadcast, tune in every evening at 7 p.m. on St. Martin Cable TV. For video on demand, log on to the official government's website at stmartingov.org. On behalf of the Department of Communication, I'm Roach, and bidding you a pleasant day further.